Hey guys, Kevin here from thesportsgeek.com, and I'm excited to introduce you to Ian, who's going to be covering CFL DraftKings picks for us here at the Sports Geek YouTube channel. Hopefully every week. Just let us know if you enjoyed this video, if you find them helpful by clicking the thumbs up button on YouTube, and then hopefully we'll have Ian back each and every week to be covering the CFL DraftKings picks. Enjoy the video.
This is sports handicapper Ian Cameron, and I am thrilled to be teaming up with Kevin at thesportsgeek.com to be providing you with weekly CFL fantasy analysis. DraftKings announcing prior to the CFL season that Canadian Football League would be added to their rotation of sports in terms of daily fantasy options, and it is just long overdue, if you ask me, to have CFL available for all fantasy sports players. And I am going to be looking forward to bringing you weekly analysis throughout the CFL season here at thesportsgeek.com. For the CFL from a fantasy perspective, and we are going to kick off our analysis here with the Week 2 slate that kicks off this week. 2 games on Thursday, 2 games on Friday, so just be aware. Most of my lineups, by the way, they're going to be going into the Thursday-Friday GPP tournaments. I want to have access to all 4 games, be able to take advantage of them all. From a weekly DFS perspective. So that is what I'm looking to do. Let's get into some specifics here and players that I am targeting in Week 2 CFL action. Of course, we're going to start at the quarterback position, and we're going to look at a few quarterbacks that have piqued my interest for Week 2. Darian Durant, number 1 quarterback for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, makes his long-awaited return as the number 1 quarterback for Saskatchewan. He suffered an early season-ending injury last year, and of course, I think he's going to be able to take advantage of Toronto's weakened secondary, which, to be honest, last week was dreadful. Jerome and that Hamilton passing attack was just simply outstanding, able to move the football at will. Darian Durant does have an ample amount of receivers to throw to, so I think he can get off the hop here at home. Crowd's going to be behind him. They're going to be fired up for this Saskatchewan team. I think Durant, Toronto secondary that struggled last week, has some question marks in terms of quality depth, and now they've also got an injury to deal with. Their safety, Jermaine Gabriel, injured against Hamilton last week. Very serious injury in the second half. He was down on the field, needed to be taken off on a stretcher. He is not at all a sure thing to suit up. In fact, I don't even think he is maybe making the trip to Saskatchewan here. So I think Darian Durant might be able to pick apart this Toronto secondary a little bit. Another good option for a quarterback might be Bo Levi Mitchell for the Calgary Stampeders. I know Bo Levi Mitchell is in a situation here where he has struggled last week against BC, but now returning home, should be able to have a better game. You look at his numbers last week, 99 quarterback rating, 233 passing yards, 1 touchdown, only 12.9 DK points. You'd expect to see a little bit more than that out of a quarterback the caliber of Bo Levi Mitchell, who's already won a Grey Cup in the CFL with Calgary. I think he'll be able to improve here. Winnipeg's defense is not bad, but they've been just worn out in every single game, and you can go back to last year. Their defense just gets worn down from being on the field too often, and eventually they wear down, they give up big plays, and I think that's where Bo Levi Mitchell could take advantage. I think he'll improve drastically, potentially, on that 12.9 DK point output that he had last week against BC. I think he'll have a better game there. I'd really like to endorse Trevor Harris. In fact, if you ask me one quarterback that could have one of the best games this week, it could be Trevor Harris of the Ottawa Redblacks. What a job he did coming in relief, cold off the bench for Henry Burris, who got injured, hand injury for the 41-year-old quarterback. In comes Trevor Harris, new to the team. And just first play from scrimmage with Harris on the field, just a bomb down the sideline to Chris Williams, big-time touchdown, and gets the Ottawa Redblacks right back into that game against Edmonton. He was fantastic. 292 yards, a 158 quarterback rating, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, 25.7 DK points. Can you believe that? 25.7 DraftKings points, and he only played, the second half pretty much. Early in the second half is when he came into that game. Just a fantastic performance. Trevor Harris is not an ordinary backup quarterback. This guy can get the job done. And I think he's a good option there for Ottawa as well. Those would be the 3 quarterbacks I'd look to target this week. Running backs that I'd be looking at this week. Jerome Messam for Calgary, I think could have a big game on the ground because, again, Winnipeg's defense has been on the field a lot in a lot of their games because Drew Willie unable to sustain drives, the offensive line unable to protect Winnipeg's quarterback very well at all, going back to last year. So there could be a lot of 2-and-outs, tire out that defense, and that's where a big-time, powerful, strong running back like Jerome Messam can really make some hay running the football late in the game, maybe wear down this Winnipeg defense out. I think he's not a bad option at running back. I know only 16 yards rushing last week, 9.4 DraftKings points, but still, I think he's going to be able to improve on that here. 7,100, not a bad salary whatsoever for Jerome Messam in a game where I think he'll be able to perform better. You look at some other running backs too. Tyrell Sutton might be a decent option for the Montreal Alouettes. I think he's going to be able to run the football against an Ottawa defense that can be a little bit susceptible against the run. But again, running backs are my recommendation throughout the season, actually, in terms of running backs. Draft only one. I mean, save your 2 flex spots for mostly receivers, actually exclusively receivers, unless you see a running back with just at a jaw-dropping price, offering up a ton of value. I would really just draft one running back per week in the CFL. It's a pass-heavy league. We all know that. Throwing the football is emphasized. I think you want to save your 2 flex positions with your CFL lineups to receivers, unless you see just incredible value on one of these running backs. So that's my plan there with the running backs. Wide receivers, a lot of good options. I think you almost have to include Durant Carter of the Montreal Alouettes at wide receiver on any of your lineups. I mean, we're talking about a guy, 22.3 DK points in week 1 for him last week. Against Winnipeg, performed very well. 8 receptions, 96 yards, very good. He didn't find the end zone, but boy, that's the only thing missing. And this is a guy that was targeted a lot by Kevin Glenn, the Montreal quarterback. So again, he's a very explosive guy, and it's worth noting too. They used him in a lot of jet sweeps, a lot of end-around plays. So they've been getting the ball to him in other ways as well. I noticed Anthony Calvillo, the new offensive coordinator, finding ways to get the football in Durant Carter's hands other than just catching it. So again, that's another area where you might be able to see Durant Carter pick up some extra points for you if he's going to be used, in those jet sweep, end-around, trick play, gadget play kind of situations. Inside this Montreal Alouettes offense. I think you got to play him even at $8,500 this week. A couple value receivers with Saskatchewan. Kendial Lawrence comes over to Saskatchewan from Edmonton with Chris Jones knows him well. I would want to see if he's in the lineup though, because there was talk that he may be just on the backup role. So you want to watch that going into this game. I think the best option, or 2 of the better options for Saskatchewan, Bagg is a very good option. I think he's a guy that's going to take over the mantle as probably the number 1 receiver on the Saskatchewan team, or at least one of the top 2. And the other guy in that top 2 receiver discussion for Saskatchewan, I think, is Naaman Roosevelt. I mean, Naaman Roosevelt is a guy that is $7,100 at DraftKings. It's a guy that, as the season progressed last year with Saskatchewan, he really came into his own, got better. And I think, at $7,100, from what I've read, if my digging pays off, and I hope it does, reading what I read from Saskatchewan's training camp, a lot of the Saskatchewan quarterbacks, including Darian Durant, really targeting this guy and really trying to get him the football. So that really bodes well, I think, for Naaman Roosevelt. And we may not get a good price like this with Naaman Roosevelt down the road. 7,100 if he has the kind of start that I think he has the potential to. So I would look at Naaman Roosevelt as a value receiver option with Saskatchewan this week, again at $7,100. That is not bad at all in my mind. And Vidal Hazelton of the Argos. I don't think Toronto's offense is... I don't trust them to put up a ton of points against Saskatchewan, because that offensive line still has some issues protecting Ricky Ray consistently, but I do think Vidal Hazelton might be worth a look. He's clearly assumed the mantle at receiver for Toronto, the number 1 receiving role, especially now. Deontay Spencer's injured at receiver for Toronto, so is Kevin Elliott, who got injured last week. He was expected to be one of the top receivers. So Vidal Hazelton now clearly by default becomes probably one of the top options, if not the top option in the passing game for Ricky Ray. So Vidal Hazelton is a guy that I think might be worth a look this week as well. $7,200 is his price. He had 7 catches for 61 yards, 25 DK points last week against Hamilton. I think Hazelton, not a bad option there at receiver for the Argos. And defense and special teams, Stampeders are the obvious choice to me. Stampeders, defense and special teams, $5,000. their salary, I think they're going to dominate Winnipeg. I mean, their defensive front can get pass rush and pressure on opposing quarterbacks, and that's the problem with Winnipeg. They've had trouble protecting Drew Willie, not only last year, but again last week against Montreal. They couldn't really keep the pass rush away from Drew Willie. That's a problem playing Calgary. I think they're a good choice for defense and special teams. Maybe BC as well, because BC's got a dynamic returner in Chris Rainey. And Chris Rainey had a return touchdown last week against Calgary. If you could use maybe Chris Rainey as your running back option, and then BC as your defense and special teams, you set yourself up for a collaborative points explosion because Chris Rainey's a threat, I think, to return one every time. And the way things work in the CFL, in terms of return yards, you get 1 point per 20 return yards. So that's important. If Rainey busts it and gets good returns, even if he doesn't take it to the house, you can get good value with Chris Rainey, because the way it works is if you have Chris Rainey as a running back or as a flex, and you also have BC, the team he plays for, as your DST option, you'll get points for him returning yards, you'll get points for a touchdown if he breaks one, and you'll also get points for that same touchdown for BC's defense and special teams unit. The return yardage counts for defense and special teams in CFL DraftKings. That's a very important thing to mention and be aware of. You could really do well. I mean, you can get Chris Rainey as a running back in your lineup standalone, and if he has a big day in the return game, which he had last week, and you have BC as your defense and special teams, boy, you could set yourself up for a big-time score from a points perspective if Rainey's able to have a solid week. So that's something you want to keep an eye on. For that reason, I think BC is maybe also worth a look. Defense and special teams this week, just because you got Chris Rainey, who was a threat last year to return kicks and is already looking like a threat to return kicks this year. Had a kick return touchdown against Calgary last week. So that is a couple of good options. Quarterback, receiver, running back, and DST this week on the CFL Week 2 slate. That will wrap up my analysis for CFL DraftKings for Week 2. I will be back next week to take a look at your Week 3 CFL DFS slate. And until next week, enjoy the CFL slate of games this week, and best of luck with your CFL DraftKings lineups.